Good afternoon. This meeting of the Board Governance and Personnel Committee is being recorded for record-keeping purposes. By participating in this session, you're consenting to the recording, retention, and future viewing of this meeting. This meeting is now being live streamed. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Thank you and welcome to the Board Governance and Personnel Committee meeting of July 27, 2021. We're starting pretty much on time, 1:51 p.m. So I'll call this meeting to order. We'll have a roll call of the committee, please.
Chairman Philman?
Here.
Treasurer Garrity or designee? Here. Senator Hughes or designee? Mr. Thal? Here. Secretary Vague or designee?
Here.
Thank you. That's everyone.
Okay, we have a quorum. The first item on the agenda is a motion is in order to approve the minutes of the June 8, 2021 Board Governance and Personnel Committee meeting. A motion, please. Move. Second. Second. Okay, thank you. Any questions on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor, aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion carried. Okay, with that, the agenda is first starts off with old business and Chris Houston.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the first item is under 4A and board docs. In the board docs, you'll find that there's a memo from me to the committee. This pertains to the Service Fiduciary Review and Board Self-Assessment Final Report. As was done for those of you who were in the Investment Committee meeting this morning, staff is reviewing the various recommendations that were assigned to the respective committees. The Board Governance, you'll be happy to learn, was assigned quite a few of the recommendations for consideration and analysis and possible further recommendations to the Board. We're going to be hopefully taking a look at a couple of the recommendations today. I'm looking for some input on some. Some of the other ones, I'm looking for some possible action from the committee, by the way, recommendations to the board. And then we're just going to review a couple of the ones that we believe have already been addressed through other action taken by the board through other means. So without further ado, you'll see, as I said, in board docs, there's a memo from me. It's kind of a action plan, if you will, work plan for reviewing the various recommendations. Some of those came out of the fiduciary review. Some of them came out of the board self-assessment. We have proposed targeted completion timeframes, and in the memo I have some proposed actions to implement the various recommendations. So I think the first one we want to turn to, if you could flip to the next slide, please. Would be it's recommendation 1.3. And this is that the board should consider term limits of 3 terms of 2 years for board and committee officer positions. As noted in my memo, just a little by way of background, for the board officer positions, staff is not recommending that there be any changes there. The officer positions for the board include the chair, the assistant chair, and the secretary. And as we know, pursuant to the State Employees Retirement Code, the governor designates the chairperson from among the members of the board, and the board appoints the secretary, who, pursuant to the Retirement Code, has traditionally been is the chief administrative officer or executive director. The bylaws do provide for an assistant chair who's appointed by the chair and serves a 2-year term. If there would be term limits imposed on the board chair, that would clearly require action taken by the General Assembly. The Secretary is also the Executive Director and an at-will employee. So the concept of term limits for that position really isn't relevant because they don't serve for a term of years. So we do not believe that the recommendation was intended to include the Secretary position. As I indicated, for the chair position, that would require legislative action. You could, if you wanted to impose term limits on the assistant chair position, but we're not recommending that be done. Relative to the committee officer positions, currently the board bylaws provide that both committee members and committee officers serve terms of 1 year, but continue to serve until a successor is appointed or elected. And other than term limits imposed upon the members of the Audit, Risk, and Compliance Committee who cannot serve more than 4 consecutive one-year terms, there are no term limits for membership on the other committees. And there are no term limits existing for officer positions. We are, though, recommending amending the bylaws to provide for 2-year terms for committee membership and for 2-year terms for officers starting in January of this year, along with officer term limits as recommended by Funston. And the reason for that is this: having terms expire in January of even years avoids the administrative burdens that we actually frankly went through this year, associated with coordinating committee appointments with newly appointed and reappointed legislative board members and newly seated ex officio board members. The board chair would always retain the power to change any committee membership at any time. We've already talked about in the prior meetings this morning about amending the bylaws to provide for the dissolution of the Defined Contribution Committee. We're also proposing that in those bylaw amendments that we do provide for providing for essentially 2-year terms for committee members, 2-year terms for committee chair and assistant chair positions, and term limits of 3 consecutive 2-year terms for committee officer positions, but not commencing until January of 2022. We have not provided for term limits for the board assistant chair position in the bylaws for the reasons as I stated previously. If the committee acts to recommend to the board to amend the bylaws, that would be taken up in the September board meeting because of the notification requirements to the board. I'd open up for any questions or comments relative to that recommendation. Anybody?
Why is it being recommended?
I'm sorry?
Why is this being recommended?
Well, to have consistency over periods of time, and we believe that, again, with the annual changes, when we're reappointing committee members every year, particularly in the odd years, when you typically would have legislative reappointments and so forth, it becomes a real scramble, if you will, in doing it every year. We just went through that this year. There was a lot of work behind the scenes to work with the chairman and coordinating, selecting, appointing members to the committees in conjunction
So you're lengthening the possible term of members?
It would be going from 1 year to 2 years for committee membership.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. So relative to that action item, if you're so inclined, later on the agenda we do have review of the committee charters and the bylaws, so I would ask to defer taking action on that until that portion of the agenda. But again, if anybody has any other questions regarding that recommendation, if not, I'll move on. The next item is item recommendation 4.3. This pertains to keeping a record of dissenting opinions and concerns on no votes, which identify the issue or reason prompting that vote to help staff address the concern and make regular use of roll call votes except for meeting minutes and consent agenda items. The board, or we do have what we call board and committee meetings planning and implementation procedures, which currently provide that for board meetings held virtually, that a roll call vote is necessary for attendance and all motions except for motions for adoption of the agenda, consent calendar, and adjournment. And the procedures further provide that for committee meetings held virtually, that a roll call vote is necessary for attendance and all motions except motions for the election of a committee chair, minutes, and adjournment. And the procedures also provide that for board and committee meetings that board members and designee votes are noted whether they are yea, no, recusals, abstentions, or absentees. We're recommending that that the committee take action today to recommend to the board to accept this recommendation and to amend the operating procedures that we operate these meetings by to provide for roll call voting being applied to all board and committee meetings, not just those held virtually, and staff to make note of dissenting opinions and concerns on no votes, if stated, so that there's a record, if you will, of what the reasoning behind those votes would be. So I'll open it up for any comments or questions on that. Yes.
I think as a fiduciary, that makes sense. I mean, you could be held fiduciarily liable for a vote, either yay or nay. So especially if you have a nay vote, registering that and ensuring that in the minutes it's registered, I could see that being reasonable. There aren't that many of us, so the roll call votes seem to go pretty quick.
Yeah.
I agree. I also think it makes sense that if somebody votes no or they're abstaining and it's because they've got a conflict or whatever the reason is, that should be specified.
Okay, good.
And I'm not on the committees.
And keep in mind, we've come a long way on this. When my older days in the board, it was just a voice vote for everything. And there was no real tabulation as far as who voted no or whatever. So, this is just another part of it that makes it more open.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
I just want to clarify to make sure that you understand that the last part of that proposed action where we talk about staff to take note of dissenting opinions, the wording says staff to take note of. It doesn't. If you want it in the minutes, then we should make that clear that you want it in the minutes. So that I just want to bring out that slight nuance. So if you just want staff to take note of it and put it somewhere on file, or if you want it to be in the minutes, which then are public and easily available. Just wanted to make that nuance known.
So by taking note of, that's some sort of a paper record, I guess? Goes into your permanent file?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll figure out
Permanent
exactly
record.
where it goes into the permanent.
Yeah.
And remember, we have our video recordings as well that are being kept for years.
Okay.
Right. Yes.
But I just wanted to make it clear. So if you didn't see them in the minutes, you didn't say, hey, I thought they were going to show up in the minutes. It's just that they will be kept record of, not necessarily in the minutes.
Yes. Okay, anything else on that one? No?
Anybody else?
Okay.
Want to do the motion then?
Might as well do that one now to get it out of the way. Yeah.
Okay. With that, I'll read the motion. A motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board include in the board and committee meeting operating procedures, 1, roll call voting being applied to all board meetings for attendance and all motions, except motions for adoption of agenda, consent calendar, and adjournment. 2, roll call voting being applied to all committee meetings for attendance and all motions, except motions for the election of a committee chair, minutes, and adjournment. And 3, staff to take note of dissenting opinions and concerns on no votes if stated. Do you hear a motion to that effect? Moved. Second? Hear a second? Any questions on the motion? A roll call vote?
Chairman Thilman?
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity?
Yes.
Mr. Lindsay for Senator Hughes? Secretary Vague?
Yes.
And Mr. Thal?
Aye.
All ayes.
Okay. All right, the next slide, please. So now we're going to be looking at some recommendations that I'm looking for some input, if possible. This next one is recommendation number 4.2. This says to consider a board policy regarding who can speak on behalf of the seat when both trustee principals and designees participate in a virtual setting. So I mentioned before about the committee and board meeting planning and operating procedures that we currently operate on. They currently provide as follows. Only one vote per member is permitted, and at times it is necessary to predetermine from multiple designees as to who will be voting on behalf of a board member. This does not address the matter of multiple designees that may speak for a seat in a virtual meeting. As you are aware, the board chairman did implement a meeting protocol in May of 2019, which does address this recommendation in part. That protocol provides that if the board member is present, either in person or telephonically, that only the board member may speak and vote. If the board member is not present, then only the designee at the table speaks and participates in the meeting. So we're basically looking for input at this point as to whether you would want to have perhaps a draft policy be prepared for committee review at a later meeting, perhaps in September, for possible action that addresses this recommendation, and if so, whether the policy should address participating in any meeting, not just those held virtually. And staff recommends that if a policy is adopted, that it applies to both in-person and virtual meetings. So I'm opening up for discussion, any input, if this is something that you would want us to continue to pursue.
Greg.
As someone who doesn't have a designee, I think the members of the committee that have designee have talented staff who are able to add a lot of value to the discussions we have. So my concern with this, I am fine with going back down this road of this policy of, of designated who is speaking and when and how, but I just want to be leery of unintended consequences of limiting some input from others as part of that.
Well, let me just address that. I think I've been pretty liberal as the chair with multiple designees giving comments. I have no problem with that. I think it's more of a semblance of order that we know who is going to be speaking on behalf. It obviously should be the board member first, but there should be a designee, I guess, as a primary or what that is going to, obviously if they're sitting at the table, we get that. But I have no problem if there's a discussion and someone in the back has a point. I have not really shut that down unless we would really really have a time issue. But it's a good point. Thank you, Greg.
Continuing doing that?
I'm sorry?
This would not preclude this movement.
Not in my opinion. I'll continue to have that. Treasurer.
Why do we need this policy?
This is a Funston recommendation.
Yeah, this was a Funston recommendation. Many of these recommendations came out of the board self-assessment process. So those of you who completed the survey, there were comments along these lines, and so Funston then worked with that and came up with these recommendations. So it's not staff's recommendation; it came from the Funston.
Oh, okay, I understand, and now I do recall that. I just want to say that I've only been on the board 6 months, but I don't see that I've never seen any issues in this regard. So.
Probably won't be much any change at all. We'll just, again, I think my original memo that Chris had said, I outlined, the responsibilities of the board member and designees. That addressed what I thought, but I will not shut any conversations down.
So am I hearing we don't need to be addressing creating a policy about this? Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm okay with what we have so far, unless anybody disagrees. Okay.
Fine. Okay.
Check it off the list.
Check it off the list. All right. Next slide, please. This is recommendation 6.1. This says, consider holding at least some committee meetings in between board meetings, perhaps virtually, rather than the day before, in order to improve decision-making and preparation time for board meetings. As we all know, our practice has been to hold regular committee and board meetings over a 2-day period, generally 6 times a year. There are challenges due to the tight time frame between committee meetings and the board meetings when preparing committee reports and their materials for board considerations. I think that was some of perhaps where this came from. More time between committee and board meetings would give board members perhaps more time to review action items resulting from committee recommendations. Staff will be requesting input today from you as to whether it wishes to receive input from other board committees perhaps, as to whether scheduling their committee meetings on dates other than the day before board meetings is something that they want to consider in making a recommendation to the board as we develop our schedule for 2022. And when this practice was initially implemented, it was really done with the thought really of requiring fewer trips to CSRS headquarters for those of you who travel out of the area. For those of you who serve on multiple committees and to facilitate the coordination of those coordinating those meetings. This would still be the case unless all committee meetings were held on the same day between board meetings. So you still have the same issue, really, if you will. So just opening up for discussion. If you want perhaps to get input from Mary.
Having been the chair of 2 committees during the same group meetings, there have been situations when we had a committee meeting on the same day as a board meeting. That really is tough for everyone, trying to get the minutes done and
right.
Yeah, just the paperwork that's involved between a committee meeting and the board meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So that I always found problematic, and I perhaps may have been the only committee chair, whoever dealt with that, just because the defined contribution meeting would frequently be on the same day or whatever. So that, yeah, so by not having committee meetings on the same day as a board meeting, that I think resolves that, and in recent meetings, we haven't done that. Now that we can do Zoom meetings, I mean, yeah, I think you're right. Most of the meetings were held consecutively in the same time frame as a board meeting just because everybody came to Harrisburg, but now we can do Zoom meetings, so why not?
Chris, because we have, 4 or 5 committees, whatever it is, can that chair at any time call a meeting?
Absolutely.
But we have to be applied with the open sunshine and the notifications. So right now, the ability of the chair can call it just with those sunshine regulations, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's still in place, yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. But Mary's point is, correct. I think, our sessions for today and tomorrow are a perfect example. We're doing this here, and it will give time for the minutes and everything for tomorrow morning for the regular board meeting. So if we could do that as much as possible, that'd be great.
I don't think it's difficult when there are like all the committees have to meet for some reason or more than, and those days can be really longer and maybe not even fit into one day. So sometimes there would be we'd pick one of the committees that maybe didn't have as big of an agenda or something to go on that same day. But it's always something to shoot for, that if, to do it at least not on the same day as the board meetings, because they are quite challenging.
Okay.
But perhaps in that case, and I'm thinking of, I think it's usually been one of my committees that frequently does get caught up in that. Maybe if it's not a significant agenda, we have it on a Zoom meeting the day before the other committee.
Yeah.
All right.
That capability.
All right, so it's something we're considering. But the idea is to avoid as much as possible having committee meetings on the same day as board meetings, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So next slide is 6.3, 6.3, which is require ad hoc committees to be board committees, and only board members should vote. So by way of background, the board bylaws currently provide that the board may establish by resolution one or more standing or special committees. When we use the term ad hoc, you can really correlate that to these special committees, if you will. And it goes on to provide that those committees are to consist of 2 or more members. So those types of committees are not ones that staff would be serving on. In addition, the chairperson may establish special advisory or review committees. It does not specify that those are only board member committees, but as far as I know, I can't remember the last time we would have established a special advisory or review committee by the chair. But the committees that when I say committees, the committees that have been created where staff and board members and designees have served together on, and all of you have experienced, or most of you experienced this, is that where staff also serves as voting members on evaluation committees, solely for procurements under a RFP process, request for proposal process pursuant to the Commonwealth Procurement Code. Those committees are not board committees established by resolution, nor are they committees created by the chair. Those are committees that have been established because of the responsibility of committees being involved in selection of the actuary, the auditor. I wish to point out that the selection of investment consultants is not done through the RFP process. That is done through a request for invitation process and is solely within the purview of the board and is outside of the procurement code. So traditionally those have been with board members only involved, and that's typically have been members of the investment committee. So what we're looking for today is really input from the committee as to what it wants to do with this. Does it want to recommend adopting perhaps a resolution to provide that only board members shall serve as voting members on, for example, evaluation committees for procurements? So we could draft a resolution for consideration at the September meeting. So I'll open up for discussion on that.
Greg, then Mary.
I would have to say, after recently serving on 2 RFP committees, that the staff support is critical, and the fact that some staff members serve on those committees as voting members is very important, and I would like to be able to maintain that. I think it adds some different perspectives and things like that that are important when evaluating those type of documents. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Okay. Mary?
I have mixed feelings. I was on the committee looking at the RFPs for IT, and it was absolutely essential that we had people on that committee who understood the business processes and understood the IT, what the needs were and what had been done recently. So it really was, I thought, very valuable to have expertise and having some board involvement, but having the key staff involved. In some RFPs, which are more policy-oriented, such as the actuary, the board actuary, that's more of a policy kind of a situation that really, I believe, should be driven by the board, more so than the selection of an IT company. So I guess I'd have different opinions depending on what kind of a committee it is.
Okay. Anything else?
Go ahead.
To your point of how valuable staff has been, and that's just wonderful, and that's what they're there for.
Turn your mic.
Thank you. That being said, they could still, and I would expect them to still be there to provide that kind of support and input and counsel, but they don't necessarily have to vote. So that's a third alternative, where they're there to provide their expertise, continue as they did before. However, that doesn't mean that they have to actually then vote. They would be providing you, just like we do in these board meetings, we're here to provide you information and perspective and background, but you will ultimately make the vote. So that is an alternative to consider.
The other thing I would also say is it says board members. I'm assuming it's board members or designees.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Well, Chris, couldn't either the chair or committee or myself create these committees and put restrictions on what those committees would look like?
Yes, we could, for example, to the actuary, that's the Finance and Member Services Committee has purview, if you will, over the selection through the bylaws or through the charter amendments that we're making. So the committee chair could be consulted in the establishment of the evaluation committee for the actuary. Independent auditor, the chair of the Audit, Risk, and Compliance Committee would be consulted in the establishment of that committee. And in those committees where it's outside the purview, perhaps it could be the board chair that would be consulted in the establishment of those committees. To Terry's point, yes, for evaluation committees you can have both voting and non-voting members. So you can always have staff serve on those committees. They would read all the the proposals, and they would provide feedback and input and comment, which is important for board members to hear, but don't have to vote. So we could do that. I could fashion perhaps a resolution just so we have it, confirmed, etched in stone, so to speak, as to the process going forward.
Yeah, I'd like to have the flexibility as much as possible, depending on what kind of committee we have and what kind of resources and numbers we need on that. So if that would, I'm assuming I have that ability at this point.
Yes.
And if we have to, some committees may need, and I hate to say we need more committees. That's the one thing.
Right.
But if it becomes necessary, I think that should be vested in the chair.
Okay. So we can put something together that would, provide that the chair would be consulted, and perhaps that you would then consult with whatever committee chair that might be involved. Good.
Works for me.
Okay. So that's 6.3. Next slide, please. This is 6.4. This is have committee chairs set committee agendas and work plans with input from committee members and the executive director and executive liaison for the committee. So as many of you are aware, we do set annual work plans for the committee. Through generally speaking, we act on those or review. The committees review them in February of every year. And currently, the position description for the committee chair and assistant chair position describes or provides that those positions are to, in consultation with the executive director and other committee members, establish and confirm an agenda for each meeting. As a matter of practice, executive liaisons through authority delegated by the executive director already work with the committee chairs in establishing the agendas and annual work plans. And then the work plans are reviewed by each committee, as I indicated, at the first meeting of the year. So what we're looking for input here is whether this committee would want to recommend to the board to amend the position description, perhaps, for those the chair and assistant chair, so as to have it include reference to the input provided from the executive director in the development of the work plans. And if so, staff will prepare a revised position description for consideration by the committee at a later meeting. And that also ties into another recommendation which provides for where was that one? In 6.5, each committee with input from the executive director and the committee's executive liaison should develop an annual list of policy priorities to be addressed by the committee, and those recommended policy priorities should be approved by the full board. I'll just cover that since it's kind of a related topic. So again, that the position descriptions that we have, you can flip to the next slide on this one, provides as part of the strategic planning process that the committee chair and the committee assistant chair are to develop an issue calendar for the committee to guide the development of agendas. So again, kind of related to this, do we want to take a look at the position descriptions to address this? We're looking for input as to whether those position descriptions would have and include reference to this recommendation by having the development of an annual list of policy priorities be part of the development of an issue calendar and an annual work plan with input from the executive director, and that the work plans are to be presented to the board for board approval. Now, up to now, we have not had these work plans gone before the board for board approval.
Sorry, they do go. They're reviewed at the beginning of each year
By the committees, but there's not like a board approval. So, the bottom line is that we could prepare draft position descriptions, which tries to address these and present them back to the committee for your review and consideration, if you'd like for us to do that.
Well, I think that, now that we've had the committees in place for, 2 years, year and a half, I think now we could tweak it with something like this, okay, which has, obviously the annual list is a good idea. At least the committee chairs can know what's going to happen in the fair near future next year. But I think also the input from the executive director and the executive liaison, so we're all on the same page when we come to these meetings and the long-term goal in the committee. So I think it's a good idea to get something together with that.
Okay, so we'll craft something and then bring it back to this committee for your.
Anybody else? Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I would just say one thing, and that is that I sit on a lot of boards, and I think one of the things we need to be cautious about is layering in too much bureaucracy. And, I think one of the commendable things about the SERS organization is its relative nimbleness. And I'm always I don't want to say anything inappropriate, but I'm always a little wary of consultants. In all my businesses and on all my business conduct, a consultant is somebody who borrows your watch to tell you what time it is kind of the way I feel. So, we have all these recommendations, which I think in some cases are good ideas, and some cases are just a consultant trying to demonstrate that they're doing a lot of things. And so I like the fact that thus far this afternoon we've voted no on some of these things, and I don't want to have a specific recommendation here, but I do think it's healthy for the board to be cautious in adopting things that really effectively just add a lot of administrative and bureaucratic effort and may not actually achieve anything substantive.
That's a good point. Thank you.
I agree. I was reading this one trying to figure out exactly what it meant. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
I think the important thing, and it's been pretty simplified, but since the beginning, we look to staff to identify what are those things that looking at the charters of the committee, what are the main things, the tasks that this committee has to accomplish throughout the year, like the assumed rate of return discussion, the asset allocation. Like when each staff person goes through and they identify them, and they are presented to the committees at the beginning of every year. So we all had them done, and the committee has the opportunity then to look and make sure everything's covered. And if it needs anything more, then we add it. So it's been a pretty simple procedure, and I think it's been pretty effective.
And I think we've been doing it. Right?
Yes, we have since the beginning. So this was just some sort of take on it, and the list of priorities. I'm not exactly sure where it came from, but certainly what the work that needs to be done that's known at the beginning of the year is put on that plan. We know exactly what month it has to be done. Does it have to be done every year, every 2 years, every 3 years? And they're out in board docs for all to see.
Okay, so it's basically just doing what we're doing.
Well, again, we could, because I know that those positions groups don't really talk, I think, specifically about work plans per se. So we could build.
Really, that's all. If you get cut through all the mustard here, that's pretty much as if you just say it already talks about the executive director working with the chair and the committees on agendas, and it's just saying on the annual work plan, because we're already doing it. And that would be just to memorialize it, and not really, to the secretary's point, not really adding any additional bureaucracy. It's more or less memorializing a good practice that we already do.
Okay. Any more on that one? So the next one, turn the slide, please, is 6.6. And this really is very similar to the one we just talked about, dealing with, it says, committees should recommend the selection of independent advisors to the board within their respective areas of responsibility. And then staff should not vote on these recommendations. This is really covered by the topic we just talked about, that we'll have the board chair be involved in figuring out whether on evaluation committees we would have staff. So I think we'll address that with that one. Okay. The next one is 6.7. This is review committee charters at least every 3 years, or we're doing it every 2 years. So staff is fine with leaving it the way it is. I think it's good to look at them every 2 years. I'm not sure if you want to extend it out to 3 years. I'm just looking for input as to whether you want to change that or not.
I think we can leave it at 2 for now, and as we go and we start polishing these up very well, maybe we can go with 3.
Okay,
let's leave it as it is.
All right, very good. So next, I'm just going to cover a couple that we think have been addressed already. If we could turn the slide, please. This is items which we believe alternative action has already been taken. 7.4 provides provides specific practical examples during ethics training and allow time for questions and answers. Our new chief compliance officer is going to be developing ethics training, and we will be providing practical examples in that training. So we're going to be taking care of that through that process. Next one is 7.5. Yeah, 7.5. I had the wrong number there. Utilize the board portal to make the most recent orientation packet available to all trustees and designees. And here, the most recent board orientation packet is now up on board docs, and it's available for you to review. And I skipped 6.2, ensure that each committee effectively reports out to the full board on all key issues such as investment, performance, and risk analyses, and that is included in the charters. So I think we've got that one covered as well. So what we're going to be doing is, like we did with the PPMRC recommendations, we're going to be coming before the committee with, additional recommendations for you to review as staff takes a look at them, and anything that we discussed today that we'll be coming back to the committee on, we'll be doing that.
You have one more point. One more point, Chris.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot 8.1. Yes. Committee chairs should be regularly briefed by the staff liaison in advance of meetings to make sure committee agendas include the desired topics and that briefings and reports are timely and relevant. I think we're doing that. So. Okay, any questions on those?
Okay. Let's go to the strategic business plan.
Right, so in board docs, under item 4B, there are three documents in there. One is the fiscal year 2020-2021 strategic business plan. Then there's a 21-22 strategic business plan. Those are the goals that we've identified. And the third document is the entire strategic business plan. And what those are showing you are some of the dates have been tweaked as far as the target dates for completion, basically moving them forward into an additional strategic planning year. But since we're doing that, there is a need, since the board approved the strategic business plan, we're asking that the board, through the committee, approve the revisions to the strategic business plan. We do have staff available if you have any particular questions, but the documents that we presented to you show the change in red as to the year change, and then there's a reason for the change in each of the documents showing the reason for the change. And as I said, the final strategic business plan, the 3-year plan, we're looking to amend that to account for the changes in the goal end dates. I'll open up for any questions on those.
Anybody on a question? Seeing none, we do have a motion, right, Chris?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board approve the fiscal year 2021, fiscal year 2023 SERS Strategic Business Plan as amended and as set forth in the attachment. Motion, please. We've got a motion. A second? Second. Thank you. Anybody on the question? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Chairman Philman?
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity? Yes. Mr. Lindsay for Secretary, or Senator Hughes, excuse me. Mr. Thal?
Aye.
And Secretary Vague.
Aye.
All ayes.
All right. Thank you very much. So now we go into there are no special presentations, new business. Chris?
Right. So under agenda item 6A, this is dealing with the amendments to the committee charters and amendment to the board bylaws. So as a follow-up to the actions taken by the Investment Committee this morning and the Finance and Member Services Committee in amending their charters, and as a follow-up to the actions previously taken by the Audit Risk and Compliance Committee and the Securities Litigation Committee to amend their charters, we're now ready to advance all of those amended charters to the board for review and approval. Along with that, the revisions to the bylaws to account for the elimination of the Defined Contribution Committee, renaming the Finance and Member Services Committee to the Finance and Member and Participant Services Committee, and also to provide for the change in the terms of the committee members and the committee chair positions and the term limits, as we discussed previously when we were reviewing the fiduciary review final report. If the committee would be taking the action today, we'll send the documents out to the board in advance of the September meeting for the review pursuant to language in the bylaws, which provides that there's a 15-day advance written notice period to all members of any changes to charters and bylaws. So unless you have any particular questions, but all the committees have reviewed these, and they're basically looking for the concurrence of this committee to the board, notifying the board that you concur with those recommendations. We have a motion for each of the charters because there are specific action items from each of the committees, and then a final action motion, if you will, on the bylaws amendment.
Okay, so there are 5 motions. I guess this is more of housekeeping than anything.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
But we do have to go through it. With that, a motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee concur with the recommendation of the Audit, Risk, and Compliance Committee to the State Employees Retirement Board to approve the amendments to the Audit, Risk, and Compliance Committee Charter as set forth in the attached. Motion, please. Second. I hear a second. Anyone in the question? Do we have to do a roll call on each of these? I guess so. Okay. Thank you, lawyers. Yeah.
Chairman Philman.
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity. Yes. Mr. Lindsay for Senator Hughes. Mr. Thal.
Aye.
Secretary Vague.
Aye.
All ayes.
Okay, thank you. Next one. A motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee concur with the recommendation of the Finance and Member Service Committee to the State Employees Retirement Board to approve the amendments to the Finance and Member Services Committee Charter as set forth in the attached. Motion, please. Second. I hear it. Roll call, please.
Chairman Philman.
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity. Yes. Mr. Lindsay for Senator Hughes. Aye. Mr. Thal.
Aye.
Secretary Vague.
Aye.
All ayes.
Thank you. It approves. A motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee concur with the recommendation of the Investment Committee to the State Employees Retirement Board to approve the amendments to the Investment Committee Charter as set forth in the attached. A motion, please. Second.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Chairman Philman.
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity.
Yes.
Mr. Lindsay for Senator Hughes. Mr. Thal.
Aye.
Secretary Vague.
Aye.
All ayes.
Motion passes. Next one. A motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee concur with the recommendation of the Securities Litigation Committee to the State Employees Retirement Board to approve the amendments to the Securities Litigation Committee Charter as set forth in the attached. Motion, please. Second. Roll call, please.
Chairman Philman.
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity. Yes. Mr. Lindsay for Senator Hughes. Aye. Mr. Thal.
Aye.
Secretary Vague.
Aye.
All ayes.
Unanimous again. And the last one, the bylaws amendment. A motion is in order that the Board Governance and Personnel Committee recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board amend the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania State Employees Retirement System bylaws as set forth in the attached. A motion, please.
So moved.
Second. I hear second. Anyone a question? Hearing none. Roll call.
Chairman Philman.
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity.
Yes.
Mr. Lindsay for Senator Hughes. Mr. Thal.
Aye.
Secretary Vague.
Aye.
All ayes.
Thank you very much for that. We're ready for executive session?
That's right.
Okay. So whatever you have to do to tee that up, Don.
All right.
Or Joe, too.
Before we go to executive session, the Sunshine Act allows an executive session to discuss any matter involving the employment, appointment, terms and conditions of employment, evaluation of performance, promotion or disciplining of any specific prospective, current, or former employee of SCRS. The two agenda items for the executive session, the executive director's video report and discussion about that, and the discussion of the status and terms and conditions of the executive director search and that replacement position, both clearly fall within the allowable topics for an executive session.
Okay.
The board will be moving into executive session. When the technical items are complete, we'll let you know. As a reminder, the public meeting will resume on this live stream connection when the executive session is complete. Okay, this meeting is back in session and now being live streamed, and as a reminder, being recorded.
Okay, thank you very much. We have completed our executive session. Our next committee meeting will be September 28th or 29th of 2021, and tomorrow is the regular board meeting that starts at 9:30 a.m. With that, if there's any other business, I see none. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved, second. Any questions? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Motion carried. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow morning.
Good job, team.
Yeah.
Quick question. Tomorrow's meeting.